As you may know, I teach religion to the 7th and 8th graders at Transfiguration School. It's been challenging, but I think things are going well considering all the obstacles that COVID has put in our way. Many of us in the school, and I suspect students, are anticipating the upcoming MEA weekend, which I think is a good and natural time to pause and evaluate how things have been going so far. We do have openings in our 7th and 8th grade classrooms. Not all of our classrooms, but in 7th and 8th grade we do have openings. So if you have a child, a relative, or a friend in 7th or 8th grade who is not currently registered at Transfiguration, maybe in another setting, and over MEA, you're thinking, this isn't going the way that we had hoped, it's this virtual or however they're doing it isn't a great fit, please do contact me or anyone at the parish or school office, and we'd be happy to talk to you about what Transfiguration has to offer. In my 7th grade religion class, I just recently showed them a famous painting of St. Jerome by Caravaggio. In that painting, an elderly St. Jerome is wearing a loosely draped sheet of crimson red fabric, is seated at a table, closely examining a large book, presumably the Bible, with a writing instrument in his right hand. Above his head is a subtle halo, and at arm's length on top of a short pile of books is a human skull. At least one of the 7th graders asked me about the skull, found it to be curious, and I told the 7th graders that in our Catholic tradition, some monks keep a skull on the table to remind them of death so that they make their decisions with death in mind. So that skull is a reminder of their own death and is intended to help them to make better decisions. And while that is true, the monk's notion of death is likely quite different than the experience of death that many of our contemporaries are anticipating. The monk with the skull on his desk does not consider heaven to be the default setting that we just fall into heavenly bliss as soon as we close our eyes for the last time. No, there's a lot more at stake for this monk. The monk with the skull on his table would almost certainly have the traditional Christian understanding of death in mind, and a death that is not immediately accompanied by an experience of heavenly bliss, but rather judgment. As Christians, we are taught and expected to believe that at the moment of our death, we will be judged by Jesus Christ in what we call the particular judgment. The essence of this particular judgment is determining and declaring whether or not we have died as friends of Jesus. Friendship with Jesus begins in our baptism. And by cooperating with God's grace, we can remain friends of Jesus until our very last breath. But that state of friendship does not continue uninterrupted without some effort, without some great effort and intention. Those who at their particular judgment are determined and declared to have died as friends of Jesus will eventually experience the joy of heaven. However, it is likely that we will first need to undergo a process of purification that will remove any obstacles that will prevent us from enjoying our full capacity for the joy that heaven offers. This process of purification is called purgatory. Now, this is where I feel unusually cheerful, because some very good Catholics people, and perhaps some of you here today, are quite concerned with the suffering that accompanies that purgatory process. And that, I freely admit, that might be the right response. I, however, don't happen to have that same level of concern. I think of purgatory as an expression of God's mercy, and if I need that purification to better enjoy the eternity of heaven, I hope that I will welcome it despite the pain that it entails. That said, the one outcome of particular judgment that we all ought to be concerned about, quite concerned about, is being found and declared to not be friends with Jesus upon our death. To make things a bit more complicated in this regard, different people have different notions of friendship. Some consider great numbers of people they don't know particularly well and don't interact with very often. Some people consider great numbers of people to be their friends, while others think of their friends as being only a relatively small number of people they've known extremely well and for a long time. How broadly or narrowly one considers friendship is likely to impact how easily or difficult one considers it to be a friend of Jesus. What the church officially teaches isn't along the lines of friendship, which I actually find very helpful. However, the official teaching is more about the state of grace, right? That's what we're essentially trying to capture with friendship, being in the state of grace. The church officially teaches us that we are friends of Jesus when we are in the state of grace. We remain in the state of grace when, by cooperating with God's grace, we avoid mortal sin. Now, this would be very bad news if there was not a remedy for the guilt of mortal sin. That would be very bad news. But there is, and it is readily available. In fact, within the last hour, I was applying the remedy to some folks, and that remedy is called the sacrament of penance and reconciliation, or confession. There's even a connection between the sacrament of penance and our particular judgment that happens upon our death. Paragraph 1470 of the Catechism, speaking of confession, says that, and I quote, "In this sacrament, the sinner, placing himself before the merciful judgment of God, anticipates in a certain way the judgment to which he will be subject at the end of his earthly life." End of quote. So there's of course, many valuable things that come with the celebration of the sacrament of penance and reconciliation, the forgiveness of sins being the greatest. However, all kinds of other psychological and spiritual benefits that we gain, and including this being, despite the world's great disdain for judgment, which is completely at odds with the way people have to actually live their real lives, we acknowledge that in going to confession, that similar to what I spoke about for clerics last week, there are standards by which God will hold us accountable, and we will be held accountable. The gist of the Church's solicitude in this regard is that we work out things on this side of death, abiding in friendship with Christ by cooperating with God's grace, especially by living the sacramental life of the church. If we do this, then we will die as friends of Jesus and enjoy heaven forever. So if a skull on your table helps you to make good decisions that help you to cooperate with God's grace and remain in friendship with Jesus, I say go for it. Get a skull. You'll probably, not a real one, you'll probably see fake skulls for sale or in different places into the first week of November. So happy shopping.